never had a camera in my head.
Hello, listening people.
Hello.
You're listening to Spit and Polish Presents. I am one of your hosts, Ryan Slawinski.
And I'm Bartek.
Hello, Bartek. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, dare I say, and I will say it. You didn't dare me, but I will proceed as if it was a dare and say that I'm doing fantastic. I'm here. I'm alive, evidently. Maybe I'm not. Maybe this voice recording's... I've died in between, and you're hearing a dead man's voice right now.
That's funny, Ryan Slawinski.
Quick, he's realizing he's in the Matrix. So, Bartek, we're spitting Polish. Why is that?
We are spitting Polish because we are always spitting, and we both happen to be Polish.
Ubi Gubi Kwanzaa.
There you go.
That was Polish for Big Fat Liar.
I know a guy who was in that movie who was on a movie we're going to talk about soon.
Ooh, I didn't know Frankie Muniz was in Truman Show.
No, Amanda Bynes.
Oh, yeah, that's right. She played Christoph.
Yes.
So, we are doing a show, Pictures Powwow, in which we talk about a movie that has come recommended. Bartek recommended the movie for this one. You can read it in the title, but Bartek, recollect us with what movie you've chosen.
Recollect us. I picked The Truman Show, which I think's from 1998.
Wow, I feel like you really recollected that really well for us.
Recollect is my action.
It is his verb.
It's my verb.
So we are talking...
As I learned in university.
Yeah, you only learnt what a verb was in university. Really says...
No, what an action is.
Oh, so... Well, you must have been lost with a whole genre of movies.
Yeah.
So we are talking Truman Show. If you have not seen it, watch it. We're going to talk about it, spoil it, review it, discuss it. It's been out for decades. You can watch it. Just go ahead. Jim Carrey in a more serious-natured role. Christoph is played by Ed Harris. I know now. Last episode I was struggling to remember what his name was, but I know that he played pretty much the exact same character in Snowpiercer, and I'll talk about that later too.
Okay.
Bartek, why?
Why did I put this blight upon us?
Yeah. Why did you put this stone on my neck?
I picked this film because it's one that I've always been interested in. My history with it is that once upon a time I was watching an Australian, I guess it's a show called 20 to 1. They were doing...
which was a televised version of Watch Mojo. But before Watch Mojo, like the countdown list, and it was like 20 to 1. Yeah. And instead of like a sexy disembodied woman's voice, we had the sexy Bert Newton with his toupee and his zany jokes and cutaways to random Z-list celebrities who had to give their 2 cents on whatever the fucking choice was. Quality television.
Yeah, that's how I remember it.
It's in itself. It was the Truman Show, wasn't it? We were watching these poor celebrities be forced to talk about stuff.
It was reality,
and it was a show. So you saw 20 to 1 long, long ago.
Yes,
in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah, in my house.
Yeah. So you think?
So I think it was actually my mum's house. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have a house.
No, I don't.
You're what we call a leech.
Leech. I call it a moocher.
Yeah, homeless. Some might say.
Well, no, I have a home, but it's
not yours.
Out of mooching, though.
Yeah, out of mooching, sure. I mean, the homeless have a home too by mooching. On my streets.
Your streets.
Hello, I'm Prime Minister Scott Morrison here.
Are you sure that your home is not mooching off the streets?
Well, I come from the streets, so it's all good. So you were saying 20 to 1, great show.
It was an episode on, I think, the best movie catchphrases or something like that.
Oh, yes.
And for this one, they picked good morning if I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
And then you had to go...
And then a celebrity was like, it was fantastic.
Celebrity. Bold statement.
Australian celebrity, so, it's a bit of a contradiction.
Person on TV who happens to be Australian, yeah.
When it cut away from Bert Newton.
Yeah. True icon.
And obviously, the line didn't really resonate with me much, but they explained, like, the concept of the film. It's about a guy who doesn't realise that his life is a TV show, and it's basically the end of this TV show where he's realised and he's moved on. And that concept always interested me in it. And then a few years later, I picked up the DVD and I watched it.
And
and I really, really enjoyed it. It's one that I've watched a few times, not too many. I think this might be my 4th or 5th time watching it. But it's one that I've shown a few people, watched it with them. And it's really... It's like I'm not super passionate about it in a weird way. It's one that I just really enjoy watching. I don't get super hyped about it, but
it's a solid movie, and you're like, hey, it's a solid movie. I like watching it, but it's not one that you're living and breathing every moment of. Where you're like, oh man, that fucking movie.
Yeah, but when I do watch it, I'm like, yeah, I'm watching the Truman Show.
I love you so much because that whole way you describe this movie, because of how like, in a weird way, you exist so heavily in the norm and outside of it, where you're like, yeah, of course I know what this iconic thing is. But then so many things you're like, I have never heard of this. It's like it never exists. And it's like in your world, this cultural touchstone doesn't exist, so it's not a cultural touchstone. And the way you just described is like, oh yeah, and then I showed it to some other people. And it's like, to me, it's like you kind of found.
I found an obscure gem,
but it's one of the most like beloved movies of that decade, and is probably considered to be Jim Carrey's one of his best movies.
Yeah,
and I'm sitting here like, yeah, and I'm thinking, wow, he found this through 20 to 1. Like, do you think that there are so many iconic movies out there that you have yet to watch because you haven't been keeping up to date with Watch Mojo's recommendations for movies to keep you invested to see, maybe I should check out?
I don't think I've ever watched them. Watch Mojo.
Wow.
Watch Mojo video. 20 to 1 hasn't talked about it.
Well, The Truman Show is made by an Australian, Peter Weir,
yep,
who did Gallipoli. He did, of course, Picnic at Hanging Rock, the famous movie where nothing happens, except for a bunch of girls wander about the fucking woods. I mean, it is a cultural touchstone movie, because that inspired the whole genre of people wandering around in the woods. What a great genre that is. Thanks for Blair Witch. So, I've watched this movie many times. I grew up with this movie. It was always on television. Out of the movies on TV, Liar Liar and Truman Show were always the Jim Carrey movies that were on. Always those two. The others, The Mask and Dumb and Dumber and Ace Ventura, they weren't on as much because I think they were a little bit more risky and adult in comparison to something like Liar Liar, which has some risque moments, but not really. It's kind of silly, goofy about a dad learning a lesson. As much as those other movies are silly and goofy and kids love them, there is lots of adult moments, let's say, and The Truman Show is just one of those movies where it's like it's a prestigious movie and TV is just going to play it all the time, like how they always play Terminator 2 all the time. So this is one that's been hammered into me. I love the film, I do, but I don't revisit it a lot myself just because it's one of those ones I grew up with.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't revisited the Austin Powers movies in I don't know how long now because I grew up with those movies as well, and I love those movies as well, but I'm not rushing to watch them anytime soon because it's as if they've never left. The Truman Show, although one I do love and have enjoyed, like you said, it's not one that I'm like, yeah, The Truman Show. It's like one of those movies that when it's on, I'm hooked in. I'm in for the ride, but it's not one that I'm like, hey guys, let's watch The Truman Show, because I don't know what it is. I think it's because it's one of those movies that's not deceptive, but it is one of those ones where, oh yeah, that's right, this movie's kind of fucking depressing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Fucked up.
Yeah, it's got a bit of a psychological edge to it, because it's essentially a guy uncovering a conspiracy centered around himself.
Finding out his life is a lie. It's also, as you said, you already said the plot of this, a guy who's unknowingly in a TV show, a reality show that's all about him, The Truman Show. And a part of the narrative, too, that makes it depressing, and the film brings this up, is the fact that the society has progressed to this way where most of the world is 100% on board for this cruel, inhuman, disrespectful prison situation that is his life,
Mhm.
where he's happy in his cage, or what you consider to be that, or his cell. And it's like, this is sci-fi dystopia distilled down pretty well, while still being a fun vehicle for Jim Carrey to run around and make faces and do voices, because the real reason that this movie lives on the way it does, outside of what a brilliant premise it is and the direction, it's because this was Jim Carrey's real first successful or noteworthy foray into breaking away from his goofy image and showing us all that he can actually act and that he can actually portray characters and not caricatures. And that is why this movie lasts so long. What do you think about that?
I agree. I was watching some of the special features on my DVD, and both Jim Carrey and a lot of the other actors who worked on the film talked about how when it started off, it was this case of like, oh, the comedic guy's doing a dramatic film. But he was very humble about it. Like, apparently on set, he would always, make reference to the fact that like, hey, this is my first time doing this. You guys need to, help me with this, or things like that. So, and it was him breaking away from what he normally does while still kind of playing to his strengths, like coming up with, gags to do or improvised.
Yeah, it's not Robin Williams in 1 Hour Photo where it's like a complete 180 on what you know of them. It is still incorporating his manic energy, his over-the-top voice and facial expressions, and that kind of childlike charm that he brings to most roles. You still have all of that, but it's aimed towards something actually philosophical and meaningful and heartfelt, rather than making us laugh and smile, which in itself is very meaningful and important. But overall, he isn't doing live-action Looney Tunes in this.
Yeah, in fact, there's a lot of footage in this film of him, I guess, being between moments where he's need to be focused on. What I mean is like him walking through the streets, not realizing that anyone's paying attention to him, and you get these like kind of seedy camera angles, and you yourself are kind of watching this guy's like, oh, I watched this guy to laugh, but now I'm kind of watching him and he doesn't know.
And now he's Dr. Robotnik, so it's really gone well for him, huh?
Yeah, that movie had a weird ending.
Yeah, right. It's really weird. At the end of the Truman Show, he walks out the door and then he becomes Dr. Robotnik, and he gets like the big goofy glasses and the big moustache and everything. It's very odd.
And he goes, I can't believe this.
It's very odd how that movie twists and turned, huh? Very strange.
And Kristoff turned into Sonic.
No, Kristoff obviously turned into Tails. Sonic was us, the audience.
I haven't seen the movie. Was Tails in the Sonic movie? No.
I don't think so,
Okay.
but we can dream. So, yeah, this movie lives on the strength of seeing a comedic actor break free of that restraint and show us that there's more. Peter Weir has done that a couple of times in his career. He did it with Robin Williams in one of his previous movies as well, I'm pretty sure. He's done it with Jim Carrey. What is satisfying to you as a viewer, as well as a performer, seeing someone like a Jim Carrey or a Robin Williams or so on and so forth go beyond just being the funny man that makes you laugh and go into something more dramatic?
If it is someone who you fundamentally believe is mostly a funny man who makes you laugh, seeing them do something else and succeed at it it's very inspiring. It's very interesting. It's something worth checking out, because you're seeing that these people are capable of a lot more than what they're known for.
Yeah, there's an underdog quality to it, because comedy is, like as we mentioned in previous episodes, like sci-fi, like fantasy. Comedy is we all enjoy it, but it's something we don't look at as highly as something like a dramatic actor. Like, you don't look at someone like Jim Carrey and say, oh, that's someone who deserves an Oscar, in comparison to someone like Daniel Day-Lewis. Well, Daniel Day-Lewis is doing this dramatic movie over here. Oh, oh, it's so serious, and like that's talking about the human condition. And with the craft of comedy, we know it's a very hard craft to hone, and it's very masterful, and there's lots of intricacies. But it's still looked down upon, even though we all enjoy it, it's still looked down upon. So the idea that someone who's in the low end of things, of comedy, can crawl their way above it and go into the serious big boy area of drama is seen as some kind of achievement. And I fall prey to that. I always get a kick out of seeing these comedy actors turn dramatic, but it's always funny to see when it's the other way around and how that often fails more, of seeing your more leading actors or dramatic actors or your more Hollywood actors try to do comedy and absolutely bomb. That's why I liked when we discussed Intolerable Cruelty all those years back, where we talked about George Clooney, where George Clooney, you have this idea, but it's like, but that guy's really good at comedy. He knows how to be a goofball and really play into what comedy strengths he actually has.
Yeah, I always thought of him as being, kind of straight manning, but then I thought of all the things I'd seen where he's doing comedy, and he does it well.
Yeah, and same with Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt does a great job of knowing how to lean into comedy as well, but you don't hear them get applauded as strongly for that, because it's like, well, that's just them stepping down the pedestal and having a little foray into the goofy territory. Oh, look, George Clooney's acknowledging that he's so handsome. It's kind of funny and all of that. Well, it's like, meanwhile, Jim Carrey here is crying. Oh my God, that must have taken a lot of work for someone like him to do. It's like, I don't know, he still worked in movies and he has acted.
He cried in Ace Ventura.
And The Mask. So
he did, yeah.
Yeah.
He was really sad in that one.
Yeah, so I get a kick out of seeing Jim Carrey do serious stuff too, because unlike Robin Williams, it isn't as shocking to me, because there was always something behind him that you could see he was a good actor, a really good actor. It wasn't just, oh, he's coked up and he's spilling a million lines out. There was always strong evidence that he could do something like a Good Will Hunting, or he could do something like 1 Hour Photo. So when he actually did that, it wasn't so shocking to me. It was just like, I wish he would do that more. While Jim Carrey, I will admit, it is a bit of a surprise that he has this range within him, because he, to me, is not one of my favorite comedic actors. Everyone loves him. I do too, but he's not one that my heart calls to a lot. He's always there. He's always been in my life in these movies, but he's not one that I get a kick out of. But I always think of him, as the silly guy who is often screaming and throwing his hands in the air.
Making funny faces.
And then you see him in a movie like this, and he still does that, yet at the same time, he does know how to pull on your heartstrings and tug at them, and the material helps that, obviously, because this material he's working with here is just something that hits the human condition, which is this idea that we're trapped, and our lives are a fake, or there's some big conspiracy going on, or the world isn't right, or my life isn't going in the direction I want it to be in. Those are all things that we as humans on an everyday basis can understand, right, Bartek?
Yeah, absolutely.
So seeing someone break free of it and realize the big conspiracy of it all and make the choice for themselves is an uplifting hero's journey that we all like to see happen on screen.
Yeah, even the, because this film does a lot of cutaways to people watching the in-universe show, and, they're lifelong fans of the show. Even when at the end he breaks away from it, they're happy for him. They're completely invested in where he's gone.
And then they change the channel and show that it was only momentary investment and that they're moving on to whatever next
as big
product.
As big as it was, they were quick to move on. It kind of reminded me of the whole thing with Game of Thrones not too long ago.
Yeah. So, what do you think about the sci-fi nature of this movie? Because it is a sci-fi idea, right? Like this idea is in this this completely controlled environment where there's a million cameras watching him, and although it isn't spaceships and lasers, it does hit those sci-fi themes, especially the questioning of ethics and morality and using technology, and this idea of what is it to be human is still applied in this, especially with Christoph, who's playing this god-like figure, and he's deluded himself.
Yeah,
And
he's
when
the Christ of this world.
when Harry Shearer shows up, he feels like he's from RoboCop. Like, he feels like one of those infomercial news people from the world of RoboCop, where he's just joyfully talking about all these things that we recognize are horrifying, terrifying, like morally degrading things that the society has fallen into. But he's like, it's pretty great.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because his aesthetic is less so, businessman in a suit, and more like an artist going really too far.
Yeah, an artist, Steve Jobs.
Yeah, Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs type.
He's got the glasses, the hat. He speaks with passion.
Those cold blue eyes that just pierce into your soul.
When he finally talks to Truman, there's like a menacing warmth to his voice.
Yeah, there's a loving quality, but he's like a stern father.
Yeah.
He's like, I love you, but you got to do what's right. Get back in the show.
Kind of like a great father archetype. He gives him life, but he was also willing to take it away at the end.
But how did it affect you as a viewer? This kind of all these themes and ideas that are brought up in the movie. Did it make you feel hopeful? Make you feel sad? Make you feel existential? What bubbles to you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I keep thinking of like the shot of Christoph looking, because his base is his
control room.
His control room is like behind the moon in the sky set. That's a really good like little image when it like zooms in and you can just see him.
I like when the moon became a spotlight and it was shining everywhere trying to find Truman. That was a great image.
Yeah, the whole thing at the end when Truman's gone missing and everyone's like looking through the town, like very artificial things are happening. If this was the real world, it just really felt like the world was breaking apart, and it almost makes you want to follow Truman through that experience. But yeah, just on its own, it was this crazy thing. The sci-fi elements led very well into the psychological parts of the film. Just it's hard to know where to begin with this. There was something I was going to mention, but then it just slipped my mind.
Yeah, it's a tough one. When the film ends, I know we're jumping ahead, but when the film ends and you've counted all these things, you see the magnificent hero's journey, him awakening and finding out what's going on and defying the rules and breaking the clouds and walking out and being happy, and then they change the channel and all that, and the ratings have been the best they've ever been when it was just a screen.
Yeah.
What's your feeling when the film ends? What were you left feeling when it was done?
I liked the fact that we don't really see what happens next, because throughout the whole film, the only views we had of the outside world were from the perspectives of things that were on TV, or I guess what the TV was facing, as in people watching the TV. You don't really see too much of like what's actually happening in the outside world, and it really hones in on the fact that all we're seeing is this fake world that Truman is on, / the fake world of television productions. So even though it would be interesting to see, like, what's the first thing Truman did when he left? How did his life progress? I guess the film wants you to hone in on the feeling of hope that Truman's now out of this situation, and that whatever happens next, at least it's in his hands.
You get a more sense of hope out of it. I
don't know about hope, but this is the way things are meant to be, in a way.
Oh, for Truman, yeah.
Yeah.
He's meant to be free. He's meant to live his life. I walk away from the film with an extreme sense of sadness and dread, because how fucked up the world of it is and how that reflects upon our society, and the fact that they changed the channel. And it's like, oh, well, this inhumane act was just a momentary distraction, and now we're moving on to the next distraction. And Christoph, I don't think fully learns a lesson. Like, I think he kind of understands what's going on, but he seems like, how could this not work? How could he defy me? I gave him the perfect world, and how could he? He feels betrayed.
Yeah, he was convinced that Truman doesn't want to leave.
And he thought he knew best, and Truman's gonna go off, but it's like this just general sense of fucking dread of just how the world works and how that reflects upon us, about how we were actually talking about this after we finished recording last episode. It wasn't even related to the Truman Show. We were just chatting about numerous things, and we were chatting about reality shows at one point, and I was talking about some reality show and how a part of the joy I got out of watching that was how the show's whole premise and the people in charge of the show were inadvertently mentally torturing the people, the contestants of the show, and harming them, and that was kind of like a weird joy to watch the show, even though I know that's wrong, and I know that there's manufactured stuff in a reality show, obviously, but it's a weird sick human condition
it's not happening to me,
is present. Yeah, this secondhand, like, yeah, like, that's fucked up, but also like, look at him fall kind of deal. And that's what the Truman Show is exploring in many ways. People are celebrating the fact that he's escaping and figuring it all out, but at the same time they've been complicit in the fact and joyful and very happy in the fact that he hasn't for 30 years. And they've enjoyed his, in a way, failures, because they enjoy when the show succeeds in stopping him from escaping. And in turn, that's them celebrating the fact he's failed to obtain freedom. That's how I look at it. It makes me very depressed because, boy oh boy, when this movie happened, that was before the big boom of reality TV. Before all the Big Brother shows and Survivor, like, all this stuff was just happening. But I always think of that as like 2000s. When the 2000s hit, that was like everything. And now it seems like reality shows still exist, but they're less of a zeitgeisty thing than they used to be. It's like there's just so many of them now.
The ones that I mainly hear about are the ones that have been going for a little while, like the Bachelor ones
and Love Island and stuff. But it seems like the way that we view reality shows, now that we're used to them now, has lessened in the intensity. Like, I remember the days in which it's like, SMS this number to vote this person off, and people would be doing it. It's like, who's going to win Australian Idol, and like, who's going to be in the Big Brother house next week, and let's watch them do these gladiatorial fights to see who can stay. And it's like, and we as viewers will watch it because it was what was on.
I remember I never watched any of that stuff, but I knew so many people that did, and just hearing all that stuff was like, is this real? Like, geez.
Yeah, is this society? Yeah, The Truman Show, the movie, perfectly evokes all of that stuff. And the trivia and the little documentary on the DVD can talk all it likes about the things that never got to be in the movie that makes the situation less or more disgusting morality-wise. But at the end of the day, the movie's here, and that's what we got.
Yeah.
And it's like, the thing that just sticks to me is the most one of the most emotional scenes is when his best friend is like, well, that means I would be in on it too. That whole speech, and you get Christophers feeding him all the lines, and you're like, oh, Jesus Christ.
And aside from the fact that the film opens on Christoph, that's like the first time you see him in the story. So just like, and that's also the sort of turning point where we focus a little less on Truman
and more on the outside world.
Yeah, it's just this really like, disgusting thing, because before that you had a lot of scenes with that best friend character, and you didn't really know whether or not he was being fed lines or anything like that, but you did understand that, like, but he's been doing this best friend role for a while, so there is in a way something a little bit genuine there. So when you get that scene where he's like emotionally giving this thing, it's like, oh man, this, quote unquote actors really improvising this really touching.
Or this feels like this is genuinely how he feels, but then he knows he has to feed into the lie of the show. But then
you see Christoph feeding him the exact emotional lines and like how he processes them for a few seconds, then he delivers on them, and it's like, oh god,
he might change a slight variant of a word here and there. I like that little touch. because that's what we actors do sometimes. It's because his friend feels like the only person in the world that actually likes him.
Yeah.
His wife doesn't like him. The mother doesn't actually like him. The dad doesn't really care either. He cares for his own means. The people at work don't actually... None of these people actually care for him as a person. And his friend seems to care the most. Like, he seems like it. And then when it's like the thing that's nailing that, really hammering that home, you cut to, oh, wait, no, that's just him being fed this information by the guy who's invested in keeping the show alive because he wants to hit the next milestone. He wants to hit the next big commercial beats and get more sponsors and get money and more prestigious stuff. Like, no one actually cares about Truman except for the girl who got kicked out of the show. But then I got to ask you, does she actually care for who he is? Does what was her name again? I'm forgetting her name.
Sylvia?
Sylvia. Do you think she actually cares about Truman as a person?
I think for what the film shows us, it leads us to that assumption.
But also the film shows us that she cares for the cause. The cause of this is inhumane and wrong and you should free him. And she has like all these posters on her wall. Like, she's got a movement.
Yeah.
But does that mean she actually... Because this is how cynical the movie is. It makes me question these things. Does she actually care about the man himself or the person? Or does she care about the inhumane treatment that this person is going through? Like, does she care about him as a man? Or does she care about the idea of what he's going through?
Well, the two things that I would bring up are, one... she was an extra on the show before we found out any of this, so there's this implication that her feelings for Truman inspired her to start up this movement.
Yeah.
And two, when Truman is leaving the dome and she's like running down the stairs, putting on her jacket, she looks pretty happy. Like, I think those two things... The first one's more of a theory, but the second one kind of leans into...
See, me being cynical, I think of her phone call with Christoph. And that phone call, you could see it in so many different ways, but a part of the way that I see it is she's arguing for a different ideological point to what Christoph is offering. She's kind of, in a way, arguing that it's like Truman figuring it out and escaping proves her point about the human condition over Christoph's point about the human condition. Where Christoph kind of sees us in a more cynical, pathetic way where we need to be controlled and we need this kind of stuff, and life's better under my vision of it. And she has that whole thing of, well, he's going to prove you wrong. And there's that part of it, it's like, well, she staked her whole entire integrity and life on the idea that Truman is going to prove them wrong. And that also makes me question of, does she actually care about Truman the man or what Truman represents? Because in the world, nobody cares about if Truman is being tortured in a way. She's the only one. So in a way, she's a pariah of this society. And if the actual thing that she's a pariah of proves her right, then she's credible again.
I guess there's also the bit where during the Christoph interview, they showed two moments in the show's history where outside people tried to...
And they were doing it for selfish reasons. There was the one guy who popped out of the Christmas present and he was like drunk or whatever, and he's like screaming, "I got on the Truman Show, woo!" And then the other one who parachutes in, I don't know if they were sincere either, but
yeah,
they
the second one
maybe, but not so much. And then the dad secretly coming into the show just did it because he was upset with how he got rode out of the show. He doesn't actually care about Truman either.
Whatever he was feeling when he first appeared, like the next time we see him, it's clearly just like he's been bored out. He's back in the show, so
yeah,
even his integrity was more for his career, it seemed.
And that's why I have to question it, because the film has so many people be proven to be self-driven and self-motivated, and or driven to keep the lie going. And she obviously is the beacon of hope. I'm not trying to say that she isn't, But these are the things that pop into my brain when I
Yeah.
watch this movie, because this movie
It's a movie that only gives you pieces.
is pushing you into certain areas that are darker than you want to be in with this aesthetic, with this idea of, oh, it's a Jim Carrey movie where he lives in 1950s land and his wife is making jokes about product placement and she's a nurse and they have to pretend to cut this guy's, like all that wacky stuff. You want to be in that more, but then the film isn't afraid. That's what I love about it. The film isn't afraid to go deep. You're given this pitch of what it is, and you go, oh, that could be funny.
Mm-hmm.
And the film's like, for a time it will be. And then it will be sad and existential.
Then the main character you're meant to like is going to have a knife to someone's throat.
Yeah. And Christoph is going to try and drown him just to prove a point. Like,
Yeah, he was doing the whole thing of like, I gave him life, so I kind of take his...
I can take it away.
Yeah.
I can cancel this show if I want. And then obviously the goal is they want him to conceive a child so that this can just keep going.
Yeah.
And going and going and going and going. And you get the feeling like no one would care. No one cares if they succeeded. Like, in terms of this is wrong.
Yeah, they'll watch it.
They'll watch it. Yeah, this is... Oh, man. This is a great... And, like, this is the stuff I love talking about, because we could talk endlessly about how funny it is, the sequence of events when he starts to realize things are fake, and him and his wife, Laura, them back and forth and how she hates him. All that stuff's great, and Jim Carrey's comedy moments are wonderful. But this is like the joy of the Truman Show, because it has all that stuff there, but it has all this stuff here too. It's a film that isn't afraid to be more than just entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thinking film. It's a film that isn't afraid to let the audience think about things. Hence, you don't know what happens to him once he leaves. You can make it up in your brain. You can go, oh, him and her met up and they lived happily ever after. But also you're like, but this is a film too where you'll be 100% okay to believe maybe he doesn't find, and if they do, he's going to be psychologically fucked. And, well, maybe is the show going to continue? Are they going to get a new baby and just start the whole fucking thing over again? Is the world actually going to change? Probably not. They'll just change the channel and move on to the next product. Kind of like Idiocracy. Except for Idiocracy was more hopeful.
Yeah, I guess this movie, The Truman Show, is it's like an episode in a grand show about the world that this is in. It's like, in this crazy world, there was this one TV show where a guy didn't know that his life was a TV show.
Yeah, like Twilight Zone.
And this is the story about how, he found out about that and left. And then that story will be told, then the world will move on, not much different.
Did you have a favorite moment, a scene or sequence?
There's a thing that the best friend character, a thing that you did with him that I really enjoyed, where they had him do the same thing in two different scenes, but the tone was very different for both.
Yeah.
Actually, in a sense, they were kind of the same tone, but
the implications
and it kind of like betrayed what they're going for. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is, there are two moments where he comes to Truman's house and he's holding like, a 6-pack of beer. And it's obviously that he's coming into the scene for this like kind of lighthearted, like, hey man, let's drink thing.
Diffusing it. Yeah.
Diffusing a situation. And the first time it's kind of, it's clearly an excuse for him to come and break up the conflict that's happening between Truman and his, character wife. And then the second time is when Truman's gone missing and they're panicking and they send him out. And when he drives up to the house, he parks the car, he's really tense. The first thing you see is the beer. And it's like, oh yeah, he's doing the thing again where he's going to try to defuse the situation. But the way that this actor is behaving before he gets into the character is just completely betraying that idea. And that's something that always stuck with me.
Yeah, it's a nice little touch. There's so many obvious touches of these actors acting in the show, but there's like nice little micro expressions and stances and moments like that are sprinkled throughout the entire thing that I think are really effective. I like the whole sequence of events in which Truman is pretending like he's back to normal. He's like, hey, I'm back at work, and hey, there's that woman's giving me the googly eyes, and no, it's these two twin guys, and they want to buy the insurance. Oh, let's do it today. Next week, okay then. And him doing that whole pretending sequence, because he's pretending, but the film doesn't tell you straight away. It still leads you down the path.
Yeah.
Because then the film switches to them finding out that he was pretending and them figuring out where he was, and he's gone for a section. Then you find he's on the boat. And,
Yeah, because
that whole sequence of events was also very thrilling because it's very fun it's like a procedural. They're trying to find the man and get him. And although we're against these people, there is just something in the realm of entertainment is very enjoyable watching a group of people get together and try to solve the problem. Hence, I love Star Trek. I keep mentioning that. I love Star Trek because it's about a group of people who are really good at their jobs trying to problem solve. Even though we're not on Christoph's side and we're against him, I kind of want him to figure it out and then when he does, it's really well done. You're like, of course it's the water. Where else would he go? And them figuring out the thing, and he's on the boat. And I like how someone asks them, like, how does he know how to sail a boat when he's like an insurance guy or accountant guy or whatever? It's like, well, you see that back in his childhood, you see his father, and it's like, oh god.
Yeah, and you got the contrast of like when the bus driver has to drive the ferry, and he's like, I'm not a bus driver, I'm just an actor.
I'm an actor. Yeah. That was a nice scene too of when the bus driver fucked up the bus. Not because he was trying to do it on purpose, but because he didn't know how to drive a bus. But he did it anyway. And that whole sequence where he's like, hey, kid.
I'm sorry,
I'm
son.
sorry. And you're like, oh, he's not talking about the bus.
Yeah, I guess another... Oh, yeah, it's a good point. Another thing that is interesting for this film in terms of watching it and enjoying it is we learned that in improvisation... when you do it well, it's funny, and when you fuck up, it's funny because you're watching these people trying to, kind of solve the situation, and that's a thing in this film as well, where these people are acting in a, I guess the term we learned was alternative space.
Yes.
I guess, and they're keeping to a general idea, the directions they've been given. We know that there are first positions. We know that lines are being fed sometimes. So when Truman is starting to discover everything and he's trying to throw a wrench in all these plans, you see a lot of these people panic. And it's almost like you're seeing a movie fuck up because you're watching a movie, and it's fun. Like when he's going to the hotel, and he gets thrown out, and the people are clearly panicking.
Yeah, and the doors aren't, or even minorly when he goes to the travel insurance, like the travel place, and they don't have anyone there, and they needed to obviously call some woman to come in, and he's like waiting around. He's like got the makeup thing still on because they had to put makeup on her, and silly stuff like that. Obviously, one of the great aspects of the movie is the back and forth between him and his wife character, because it is clear to us, the audience, that she's very on board for being a part of the propaganda machine. Like, it's so crystal clear. While the friend, like we said, there's something about him where it's like, somewhat feels genuine, but she, out of all the characters, is the one where it's like, oh, she's the stooge for the company. She's the plant.
In the
flashback when they were trying to pretend that they're all children by just combing their hair differently. That was very fun. And Jim Carrey was doing like his goofy voice where he's like, I'm a young guy. That was great.
He had very much Jerry Lewis energy in that, I felt.
Yeah, he reminded me of Nicolas Cage's voice in G-Force.
Oh, right, yeah, the mole.
The mole, which Nicolas Cage also used in a movie where he was pretending to be a teenage version of a character.
Yes, you told me that.
Who married Peggy Sue. Yeah.
What I was going to say was, in the special feature documentary thing, one of the most interesting parts of that was listening to the best friend character and the wife character, their actors talking about the backstories that they created for the characters. And, even though this is death of the author, the stuff that they talked about really does fit in with, like, the things that we kind of get when we watch the film. So, like, the best friend's actor talks about how, this guy had to play Truman's best friend when he was the age of 7. So he had to grow up with this lie. And also because he's always next to Truman,
Yeah.
even as he was growing up. There is a sort of genuine friendship there, and that's kind of what we were getting. And with the what's her name, Laura Linney, she was talking about how this character is, corporate stooge. It's like whenever she successfully does a product placement and becomes successful, and whenever she gets to have sex with Truman, she gets a big bonus. And so you see in the film, like, oh yeah, she's always pushing towards those two things.
Yeah, she's a bitch.
Yeah.
I love when he gets her in the car.
Yeah.
That's an amazing sequence of events.
And
like that whole that
her
whole
trying to save the whole thing.
I love when she's so happy that they got over the bridge, but then she realizes, oh no. Because she's like, I just thought we were going to die for a moment there, but oh, we got over the bridge, but yay. And then she's like, oh no.
And even her last line, she's like, this is unprofessional.
Oh, fuck. Help me. Somebody do something. I love, the old neighbor with the bin all the time, and that stupid dog who then... I like the touch. It's so stupid that the dog was acting too, because we get to see what the dog's really like.
It's like a hound guard
yeah,
dog.
It's like a bloodthirsty dog. But in the other times, like a happy-go-lucky, yay, it's a performer too, which is so weird.
That
but
climax,
it's great.
that climax scene where all these familiar actors are now acting as their real selves, like the twins.
Oh, the twins with the different accents now, and they're like much gruffer and meaner.
The parents who we had the whole thing with the best friend growing up with them, but they were, looking after this kid as he was growing up, but they're still detached. Yeah, it's really sad.
The best performance to me in the movie, Jim Carrey's great, but it's Ed Harris. Christoph. I don't see a performance. I believe that's a real guy. He nails it. Obviously, there's a Steve Jobs inspiration there, but I think he just transcends beyond. I think this is one of those great performances in which it's like everything about him is wrong, but I believe that he believes it. And since he believes it, I believe in the narrative, and thus I believe in him as a character. And I'm sure he had like documents and pages of notes of saying what his character's backstory was, and he's internalized, and he's
specifically 10 pages,
and he's showing it through his performance. But boy, I've always liked Ed Harris. He's one of those underrated actors, and he basically plays the same character in Snowpiercer, where he's like the head of this whole thing, and he talks to the hero in a very eloquent way and tries to gently convince them to keep perpetuating the gruesome situation, and the hero rejects that. Basically the same character, except for in Snowpiercer, they're actually in the same room and they're interacting face to face. But I love him in this movie. There's just something cold and warm about him. He does a great balance between those two things of being so cold and yet so warm. And it's a masterstroke of a performance.
It's not that he's just got this twisted love for Truman, or just that he's in it for the ratings and the money. There's clearly both going on.
He's in it for the art too.
Yeah, like you see that scene where like you got that really big screen with
Truman on it.
Yeah,
sleeping.
night vision sleeping Truman, and he like just strokes across the nose in a moment of privacy.
Yeah, and how he treats all the other staff as well. I mean, Paul Giamatti's in the movie. We'll talk about Paul. He'll get his own little section. But I loved him in this movie. I always think of Ed Harris as Christoph. He's a great actor, but he just encapsulates this role so perfectly. This arrogance, yet supreme brilliance. You can see from just the way he performs, you don't need the exposition scene to tell you how Christoph managed to convince the world that this was a great idea, because Christoph existing as a character convinces me that he managed to do that sometime 30 years ago.
It's the acting, the performance, even the costume.
Oh, the glasses and how much he fiddles with those and takes them on and off. And like,
I'm actually starting to wonder if I was slightly inspired by this for our university performance.
The way he strokes things as well, where they're so tender love, like you said, the big screen, but also near the end, he's got the little one on his lap, and even when he rests his head on it, when he knows he's failed, and it's like, in another actor's hands, that's like typical corny 101 stuff, but the way he like gently falls into it, and his body is just so frail, and like, I'm defeated, but he's still got this kind of noble quality to him, like this air of authority.
He's an artist about it all.
Yeah, and you could see why in Darren Aronofsky's film Mother, they cast him to be the Adam character, because that movie's all about like, hey, do you remember the Bible? That's that movie. It's like, what happens if all of this was the Bible and him and Michelle Pfeiffer are Adam and Eve? They might kind of make her like more of a Lilith type character, but she's supposed to be Eve. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, man, Ed Harris is so fucking good. Jim Carrey's great. All of them are great. Laura Linney, but Paul Giamatti. Is this the youngest we've had Paul on the show?
Have we had any other 90s films with him in it?
I don't think so.
It's all been 2000s, I think.
And yet he still looks so old.
He doesn't look very different.
Has he ever looked young?
Maybe it's the like curse and blessing.
He's probably around our age when he did this. Think about that. It's probably because we're like 27, turning 28. Like he's probably around our age, maybe a couple years older. And yet, if you asked me how old is Paul Giamatti in this movie, I would say 39. He just looks so like a guy who's like in his midlife. And yet, when you think of him in the script, his character is fresh-faced young intern guy helping out the station or whatever. But it's like
he's got seniority over like one guy.
Yeah, but he's still like young enough to not be like,
This is like 4 or 5 years before Big Fat Liar.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy? Like, think about that.
I didn't think of that aspect of it.
He has a goatee.
Yeah.
He doesn't. Yeah, far out. Yeah, right. Isn't that nuts to think about?
Yeah, this was way before Lady in the
I didn't
Water.
confirm how old he was in this, but he's definitely. He's always felt that way. That's why when we see Paul Giamatti in something today, I'm like, oh man, he's always kind of the same. Even though he has aged and he has gotten broader, he just has always had like a 55-year-old energy to him. Like he always feels like someone who's like about to have a midlife crisis energy to him. In this, it feels like he's about to have a midlife crisis about the whole entire thing. It's wonderful stuff.
Yeah, well, during the climax, he was kind of resisting Christoph a little bit, like, because he was in charge of like the weather effects.
What do you think about seeing Paul Giamatti in a more successful, serious role? Because he's not being funny in this.
He's got the one scene where he's like slacking off and then he gets caught and he's like, I was just letting the guy.
Yeah, but overall, how did you feel? Because we've always had him be silly, even in something like Lady in the Water, which is him trying to be in a serious role.
Well, milk moustache, that's all I'll say.
Bug. So, bug.
That's right, he had a stutter in that film.
How could you forget? He also dressed like fucking Shaggy from Scooby-Doo.
Yes.
How could you fucking forget Lady in the Water?
Was that the
Scrunt?
Yes, was that the one that Matthew Lillard liked one of our tweets?
Yeah, Matthew Lillard liked our tweet about a picture of Matthew Lillard as Shaggy and Paul Giamatti looking like Shaggy and Lady in Water, and I asked who wore it better. And I asked Matthew Lillard to please reply with an objective answer. You can't just say, oh, it's me. And he never replied, but he did like that comment as well. Like, he knows, guys, I've got to be objective on this one. Maybe in a year's time he'll hit me up and let me know who wore it better.
Maybe he's still composing his response.
Yeah, he's building up his Shaggy energy. He's like Venom. He's waiting for it to calm down a bit. Not Venom the character, but Venom like the actual thing.
I was going to say, I think Twin Peaks The Return's where he has to calm down from.
But what do you think? We're used to making jokes. Oh, it's Paul Giamatti. Yeah. But in this, he's actually serving a serious plot element. Mm-hmm. How did you feel? Was it weird?
Yeah, I guess he and Jim Carrey kind of were both giving a more, serious performance.
Yeah, I guess for us. I mean, I don't know if Paul Giamatti was doing silly shit before this, because in all honesty, what we've done on the pod with Giamatti is kind of like the oddities in his career, because usually he's in like, oh, he should have got an Oscar role, right? Usually like, oh, him in Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe and like stuff like that, where it's like, oh, he's a really, like, we both know he's a great actor, Sideways and stuff like that, but
Lady in the Water.
What we've done on the pod, we've seen it when he's openly done shit, funny crazy
Children's
nonsense
films, yeah.
films or like adult comedies that are silly. And it's like, those are oddities. But for us, it's like, oh, here he is in Truman Show. I was waiting for him to do some goofy shit, and he never did. And I was like, ah.
Honestly, yeah, when I think back to my other viewings of The Truman Show, like, I only really remember the shot of, like, Christoph telling him to, turn it up, and, like, he looks back with, like, this nervous look. Like, honestly, I didn't even remember that he had really other scenes. I thought he was just kind of, like, almost an extra in a way.
Well, it was before we all knew who Giamatti was, I think. I think he was still on the up and up. I don't know what film made him. I would say Sideways, probably.
Big Fat Liar, yeah.
Big Fat Liar. You're right.
He turned blue.
He didn't turn blue. They made him blue.
Yeah. Good
it's
point.
not like,
yeah.
well, we all get a little sad sometimes, Bartek. No, I'm literally blue.
I keep blaming myself. I don't think other people did it to me.
Yeah. So that's The Truman Show. I think we both recommend it.
Mm-hmm. I think the only other thing that I wanted to bring up was the actual filming location, the town.
Oh, yeah.
How I believe I knew this, but hearing it in the special features that this is actually a real town was honestly like, oh, I really needed confirmation for that, because it just looks like this super manufactured location.
That's American towns for you.
Yeah, well, it's this one town in Florida somewhere.
That's Florida for you.
Yeah.
That's The Truman Show. Thanks for recommending it, Bartek. I believe it is my recommendation now for the next episode.
I know it.
You do?
I know it's your recommendation. I don't know what your recommendation is. I know
I was saying, like, you do know it's mine. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Can you confirm it?
I give you confirmation and permission.
Oh, you're a Catholic priest now? You're giving me confirmation?
And permission.
Oh, and permission.
That's what priests do, yeah.
Do they give you permission too?
I give you permission to say amen and take the bread. Sorry, the body.
I give you permission to get down on your knees. Sorry, that's just what my priest said. So,
Wait, did he do something?
No, I did the things. So,
so he didn't even pray.
he made some noises, but we are going to be talking about, for the next one, a 2016 film called Christine. From 2016, not the 1980s movie called Christine by John Carpenter. So this isn't a movie about a talking car or a demonic car. This is a true life story movie.
Okay.
Christine, starring Rebecca Hall. I don't want to talk too much about it. I would love it if you could try not to look up anything about the story itself. Just watch the movie.
I will look up nothing. I don't know who's in it. I'll just watch
Rebecca Hall. She's in it. So
Annie Hall.
A Hall. But
I said Annie Hall.
Annie Hall. But yeah, because it's one of those ones where I knew before watching it what the real life story is about, and I'm always curious to know what someone who doesn't know what the true life story is about,
that'll be me,
watching it and seeing, like, how did the film stand on that merit in comparison to me, where I knew what it was and the film stood in a different way. So we'll be talking about Christine from 2016 next time.
Sure.
Bartek, where can people find us on the social medias?
You can find us on the internet, on the social medias. We are on Facebook. You can find our page on Spit and Polish Presents. We're also on Twitter under the name Spit and Polish Presents.
Yep.
If you simply Google us, you'll find all the places. We upload on Podbean, and that goes on to Apple Podcasts, Google Play,
YouTube.
We put it on YouTube where you can comment.
Yeah, and you can email us with your questions, queries, concerns, and your own recommendation for films on those social medias, as well as our email, spitandpolished@gmail.com. All of this stuff is in the description of this episode.
Yep.
Well, Bartek, the episode is over now, and I've realized that I've actually been recording not this episode, but my whole life has been recorded, and this podcast is a lie. And everything is false, and you're in on it.
Yeah. My favorite season was when you were 7.
Oh, thank you. I liked that season of my life too. It was very good.
Yeah.
You weren't in it, but it was very good.